My name is Michael Harrington. I'm just an ordinary guy from Cedar Creek, a small town in upstate New York where everybody knows everybody. For 15 years, I worked at the same insurance company, climbed the ladder to regional manager, and built a life I was proud of with my wife, Rebecca. We met in college. She was studying marketing, I was in business administration. We got married right after graduation and moved to Cedar Creek because we both wanted that small town life, away from the chaos of big cities. We bought a modest three-bedroom house on Maple Street, the kind with a white picket fence and a porch swing. Rebecca got a job at Horizon Marketing, the biggest agency in town, and quickly became one of their top account executives. For 12 years, I thought we had the perfect life. We hosted neighborhood barbecues every summer, went to the local church on Sundays, and were saving up to travel to Europe for our 15th anniversary. People in town used to call us the golden couple. I guess that should have been my first warning. Nothing that glitters stays golden forever. The first sign came when Rebecca started working late. Not just occasionally, but 3, sometimes 4 nights a week. At first, I didn't think much of it. She explained that they had landed a major client, a regional supermarket chain that wanted to revamp their entire marketing strategy. It made sense that she'd be busy. Then came the business trips. Weekend conferences that had never been part of her job before suddenly became essential. She'd leave on Friday mornings and return late Sunday nights, exhausted but oddly energized. That I'm not naturally suspicious. I trusted her completely. But when your wife of 12 years suddenly changes her phone password, keeps her phone face down at all times, and takes calls in another room, well, even the most trusting husband starts to wonder. The day I discovered the truth was an ordinary Tuesday in April. Rebecca had left for work, and I was working from home because the office was being renovated. Around noon, she texted saying she'd forgotten some presentation materials and asked if I could bring them to her office. I found the folder on her desk in our home office. As I picked it up, a yellow sticky note fluttered to the ground. It had an address written on it, not her office address, but someplace on the other side of town, and a time, 1:30 p.m. Something didn't feel right. I decided to drop off the folder at her office, and then, well, I'm not proud of it, but I decided to check out that address. I pulled up to a small boutique hotel on the outskirts of Cedar Creek at 1:20 p.m. At 1:28, Rebecca's car pulled into the parking lot. 2 minutes later, another car arrived, a sleek black Audi I recognized immediately. It belonged to James Parker, the creative director at Horizon Marketing and Rebecca's colleague for the past 5 years. That I watched as they walked into the hotel. Not touching, but standing closer than colleagues should. They didn't even look around to see if anyone was watching. That's the thing about affairs in small towns. People get comfortable, complacent. They think no one will notice, or if they do, no one will say anything. I sat in my car for 2 hours, my world crumbling around me. When they finally emerged, laughing about something, I took photos with my phone. Not because I needed proof for myself. Seeing them together had been proof enough, but because I already knew I would need evidence for what would come next. That I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. By the time Rebecca came home that evening, I had composed myself. I acted normal, asked about her day, listened to her lies about the productive meeting she'd had with a new client. I didn't confront her. Not yet. That wasn't part of the plan that was already forming in my mind. You see, in that moment, sitting in my car outside that hotel, something inside me had changed. The hurt was there, deep and searing, but alongside it was something colder, more calculated. Rebecca and James hadn't just betrayed me. They'd made a fool of me in our town, among our friends, in the life we'd built together. And that, I decided, could not stand without consequences. For the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life. To Rebecca, I was the same devoted husband, maybe even more attentive than before. I brought her flowers randomly, suggested date nights, and listened intently when she talked about work. I wanted her to feel secure, to believe that her secret was safe. Meanwhile, I was gathering intelligence. I installed a tracking app on her phone while she was sleeping. I recovered deleted texts using software I found online. I set up a small camera in our home office that captured her making late-night calls to James when she thought I was asleep. What I discovered made me physically ill. Their affair hadn't been going on for weeks or months. It had been going on for nearly 3 years. 3 years of lies, of me being the town fool without knowing it. Worse still, I learned that people at Horizon Marketing knew. Not everyone, but enough. Some of the texts between Rebecca and James joked about how they had fooled me, how they could be obvious because I was too trusting to ever suspect that I also discovered something else. James was married, too, to a woman named Claire who taught second grade at Cedar Creek Elementary. They had 2 young children. In their text exchanges, James and Rebecca occasionally discussed the complications of their respective marriages, but it was clear they had no immediate plans to leave their spouses. They were content to have their cake and eat it too, armed. With this knowledge, I began formulating my plan. This wouldn't be a hasty confrontation followed by a messy divorce. No, this would be methodical, calculated, and ultimately far more devastating than anything they could imagine. The first step was financial. I had always handled our major finances, but Rebecca had her own accounts too. Over the course of a week, I moved most of our joint savings into a new account in my name only. Not all of it. I wasn't trying to steal from her, but enough to ensure I had resources for what was coming. I also cataloged every asset we owned, from the house to the cars to Rebecca's expensive jewelry collection, most of which had been gifts from me over the years. Next came documentation. I compiled all the evidence of her affair, photos, texts, emails, hotel receipts I'd found in her purse, and stored them securely in the cloud and with my attorney. Speaking of which, I contacted the best divorce lawyer in the county, a sharp-minded woman named Evelyn Marsh who had a reputation for being ruthless in court. I paid her retainer from my new private account. The third step was the most difficult, but also the most necessary. I started confiding in selected people about what I had discovered. Not everyone. I wasn't about to broadcast my humiliation to the entire town. But I did tell my brother, my 2 closest friends, and, most crucially, Pastor Williams from our church, who had counseled Rebecca and me during a rough patch years earlier. These weren't just conversations for emotional support, though I certainly needed that. They were strategic. In a small town like Cedar Creek, information is currency, and I needed to control the narrative before Rebecca realized what was happening. The final piece of preparation was the most delicate. Through some careful questioning around town, I learned that Claire Parker, James's wife, volunteered at the public library every Wednesday afternoon. The following Wednesday, I happened to be browsing books in the history section when she was shelving nearby. "Mrs. Parker?" I asked, though I knew exactly who she was. "Yes," she replied with a friendly smile. Claire was petite with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor, the opposite of Rebecca's confident, sometimes brash personality. "I'm Michael Harrington. I believe my wife Rebecca works with your husband at Horizon." "Oh yes. James mentions her often. She's quite talented, from what he says." "I'm sure he does mention her often," I thought bitterly. But I maintained my composure and suggested we grab coffee sometime since our spouses worked so closely together. She agreed, and we set a date for the following week that I returned home that evening to find Rebecca texting on the couch. She quickly put her phone down when I entered, screen hidden from view. "How was your day?" she asked with practiced interest. "Interesting," I replied truthfully. "I met someone new today. We're going to have coffee next week." "Oh, who's that?" she asked, her tone casual, but I could detect a note of wariness. "Claire Parker, James's wife. Lovely woman." The color drained from Rebecca's face so quickly I thought she might faint. She mumbled something about that being nice and excused herself. To the bathroom, where I heard her frantically making a call, no doubt to warn James. Let them worry, I thought. The storm was gathering, and they had no idea what was about to hit them. My coffee with Claire Parker was deliberately casual. We talked about our jobs, our time in Cedar Creek, and our spouses only in passing. I was charming, attentive, and completely non-threatening. The last thing I wanted was for her to warn James that I was acting suspiciously. As we parted, I mentioned that my wife was working late quite often these days, and asked if James was experiencing the same with this new big client they were supposedly handling. Claire's momentary confusion told me everything I needed to know. "James hasn't mentioned any big new client," she said. "But he has been working late too. Must be something different." I nodded sympathetically, as if we were just 2 spouses dealing with the demands of our partners' careers. But I had planted the first seed of doubt in Claire's mind. I knew she would ask James about this mysterious client that his colleagues' husband had mentioned. Sure enough, 2 days later, Rebecca came home in a foul mood. She didn't mention why, but the tight set of her jaw and the way she slammed cupboards in the kitchen told me that James had likely been questioned by his wife and had subsequently confronted Rebecca about our coffee meeting. Phase 1 was complete. I had disrupted their comfortable routine and introduced an element of stress into their illicit relationship. Phase 2 began the following Monday that I arrived at Horizon Marketing's office building at lunchtime, carrying a gift basket. The receptionist, a young woman named Tara, greeted me warmly. She recognized me from company events. "Is Rebecca available?" I asked. I brought a surprise for her. "Oh, that's so sweet. Let me see. She's actually in a meeting with James and some other team members in conference room B. Should I interrupt?" "No, no," I said with a conspiratorial smile. "Actually, this is perfect. Could I just sneak in and leave it on her desk? I want it to be a real surprise when she returns." Tara hesitated only briefly before buzzing me through. She'd seen me at company parties for years. I was the devoted husband bringing a gift. What harm could there be? Rebecca's office was midway, down a long corridor. I placed the gift basket, containing her favorite chocolates, a bottle of wine, and a card, prominently on her desk. Then I casually walked through the office area, greeting the few employees who weren't at lunch. I made sure to be seen. Just as I was about to leave, I paused by a cubicle where a young graphic designer named Megan was working. Megan had started at Horizon about a year ago, and according to Rebecca, she was talented but naive. "Hi, Megan." "Right," I said. "I'm Michael, Rebecca's husband." She looked up, startled but smiling. "Oh, nice to meet you, Mr. Harrington." "Michael, please." "Hey, since I ran into you, Rebecca mentioned that you're working on layouts for the Riverside Supermarkets campaign." Megan's brow furrowed. "Riverside Supermarkets? I don't think we have them as a client." I feigned confusion. "That's odd. Rebecca's been working late for months on this big supermarket chain project. I assumed everyone in the office was involved." "No, sir. The only major project right now is the Cedar Creek Community College rebrand, but that's mostly James and Rebecca handling it directly." I nodded thoughtfully. Must have misunderstood. "Anyway, lovely to meet you, Megan." As I left the building, I knew exactly what would happen. Megan would mention this conversation to her colleagues. They would confirm that there was no supermarket chain client. Word would spread around the office that Rebecca's husband thought she was working on a project that didn't exist. People would connect the dots, especially those who had already suspected Rebecca and James. Office gossip would intensify. Questions would be raised. The second domino had fallen. Phase 3 came 2 days later, at our community's monthly town council meeting. Rebecca and I had always attended these meetings. Civic involvement was important in small towns like Cedar Creek, and it was good for networking. James and Claire typically attended as well. This particular evening, I arrived alone, explaining to neighbors who asked that Rebecca wasn't feeling well. I took a seat directly across from where James and Claire were sitting. Throughout the meeting, I was engaged and friendly with everyone, except James. When he spoke during the public comment period, I stared at him with a cold, knowing expression. When he and Claire were speaking to others during the refreshment period afterward, I positioned myself nearby, always within his line of sight, that I never said a word to him. I didn't need to. My presence and my unwavering gaze were message enough. "I know what you're doing to be why the time I left." James was visibly uncomfortable, wiping sweat from his brow despite the air-conditioned room. Several people had noticed the tension, including Mayor Thompson, who asked me quietly if everything was all right between James and me. "Just a difference of opinion on how certain matters should be handled," I replied cryptically. "Nothing that won't be resolved soon." The rumor mill of Cedar Creek was now fully operational. Phase 3 complete. That night, Rebecca came home. Late, as usual. But this time, she was agitated, pacing the living room after she thought I had gone to bed. I watched her through the crack in the door as she made a frantic call. "We need to be more careful," she whispered urgently. "I think he suspects something." "No, I don't know for sure, but he's been acting strange." "Yes, people at the office are talking." I know. Just lay low for a while, okay?" I smiled in the darkness. The pressure was building, and it was only the beginning. The next phase of my plan required patience. For 2 weeks, I maintained normalcy at home, while the rumors I'd started continued to circulate through Cedar Creek. I could see the stress taking its toll on Rebecca. She lost weight, developed dark circles under her eyes, and checked her phone constantly with nervous glances my way. During this time, I had a second meeting with Claire Parker, this time at her suggestion. We met at a cafe 2 towns over, where she was less likely to be recognized. Something's going on with James, she confided, stirring her latte absently. He's distracted, irritable with the kids. When I ask what's wrong, he says it's just work stress, but her voice trailed off. But you don't believe him. I finished for her. She looked up sharply. Do you know something, Michael? I hesitated, playing the part of the concerned friend. Who doesn't want to get involved? I don't know anything for certain, I said carefully. But Rebecca's been acting strange too. Working late, business trips that she's vague about. Last week, I tried to surprise her at the office around 8. She'd said she was working late, but the security guard said she'd left at 6 with James. Claire's hands trembled slightly as she set down her cup. I see, she said quietly. I reached across the table and took her hand in a gesture of compassion. Claire, I don't know what's happening, but if you ever need to talk. She nodded gratefully, tears forming in her eyes. As we parted, I suggested that perhaps she should stop by Horizon Marketing unexpectedly sometime, just to bring James lunch or something casual like that. That's what I'm planning to do with Rebecca, I added. Maybe we're both overreacting. Maybe, she agreed. But we both knew we weren't. 3 days later, my phone rang while I was at work. It was Claire, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. She had taken my suggestion and brought lunch to James, only to find him and Rebecca in an unmistakably intimate conversation in his office. They hadn't seen her. She'd left before they noticed, but she had seen enough. I don't know what to do, she cried. We have the kids to think about. We should meet, I said firmly. Not just us, all 4 of us. Clear the air. After some discussion, Claire agreed. She would confront James that evening and insist on a meeting. I would do the same with Rebecca. That night, when Rebecca came home, I was sitting in the dark living room, waiting. Michael, why are you sitting in the dark? She asked, flipping on the light switch. I think we need to talk, Rebecca. She froze, her hand still on the switch. About what? About you and James. The color drained from her face. Michael, I don't know what you're. I held up my hand. Don't. Just don't. Claire knows too. Rebecca sank into the nearest chair, her legs seemingly unable to support her. How long have you known? She whispered. Long enough. We're meeting with James and Claire tomorrow night at Pastor Williams' office. 7 o'clock. A counseling session? Michael, it's not a request, Rebecca. Either you're there or I go straight to a divorce attorney with all the evidence I've gathered. This wasn't entirely true. I had already retained Evelyn Marsh, but Rebecca didn't need to know that yet. She stared at me, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she said. I never meant to hurt you. I looked at her, this woman I had loved for so many years, and felt nothing but cold determination. Save it for tomorrow, I said, and walked upstairs to sleep in the guest bedroom. The next evening, all 4 of us sat stiffly in Pastor Williams' office. James looked like he hadn't slept in days. Claire's eyes were red and swollen. Rebecca kept twisting her wedding ring around her finger. Pastor Williams, who had been briefed by me earlier, began by stating that this was a safe space for truth, but that healing could only begin with complete honesty. James and Rebecca admitted to the affair. They apologized tearfully, blamed stress and marital dissatisfaction, promised it was over. The usual script for caught adulterers. I listened in silence, letting them talk themselves into a corner. When they finished, Pastor Williams asked if Claire or I had anything to say. Claire spoke first, her voice breaking as she described her sense of betrayal, her concerns for their children, her uncertainty about whether their marriage could be saved. Then it was my turn. I have just one question, I said, looking directly at James and Rebecca. How did it feel, making fools of us for 3 years? Did you laugh about it together? Did the risk make it more exciting? Their shocked expressions confirmed what I suspected. They had no idea I knew the full extent of their deception. 3 years. Claire gasped. I nodded grimly. 3 years, 2 months, and approximately 16 days. Based on the evidence I've gathered. What evidence? James demanded, a flash of anger cutting through his practiced remorse. In response, I pulled out my phone and played a recording, a conversation between Rebecca and James from 2 months ago, captured by the device I had hidden in our home office. In it, They explicitly discussed how long they had been involved and joked about their spouse's ignorance. Claire burst into fresh tears. Pastor Williams looked deeply troubled. James turned pale. Rebecca stared at me in horror. "You've been spying on me?" "I prefer to call it discovering the truth," I replied calmly. The meeting deteriorated after that. James stormed out, Claire, following in tears. Pastor Williams suggested that Rebecca and I continue our discussion privately, but I declined. "I think we've said all that needs to be said," I told him, standing to leave. "Rebecca, you might want to find somewhere else to stay tonight." As I walked out, I heard Rebecca pleading with Pastor Williams to help her save our marriage. But we both knew it was far too late for that. Phase 4 was complete. The affairs were now public knowledge among the very people whose opinions mattered most to Rebecca and James, their spouses, their spiritual advisor, and soon, the entire town of Cedar Creek. Word travels fast in small towns, especially when it's scandalous. By the end of the week, most of Cedar Creek knew about the affair between Rebecca Harrington and James Parker. The revelation spread from the church community to the local businesses. From the school where Claire taught to the insurance office where I worked that I didn't have to say anything directly. The story told itself through concerned glances, hushed conversations that stopped when either of us entered a room, and the awkward attempts at comfort from well-meaning friends. "How are you holding up, Mike?" became the standard greeting whenever I ran into acquaintances at the grocery store or gas station. That I crafted my response carefully, slightly sad but dignified. Taking it one day at a time, I would say, "It's been difficult, but I appreciate everyone's support." This positioned me as the wronged but gracious husband, a sympathetic figure in the community drama. Meanwhile, Rebecca was experiencing a very different reception. She had moved into a hotel temporarily, but returned to our house when I was at work to collect more of her belongings. Our neighbor, Mrs. Landon, called to tell me she had seen Rebecca looking a fright, all disheveled and red-eyed, as she loaded suitcases into her CART Horizon Marketing. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Megan, the young graphic designer I had spoken to, called me out of the blue. She was distressed and felt she should tell me that Rebecca had been asked to work from home indefinitely while the company's leadership decided how to handle the situation. Office romance was one thing. A married executive sleeping with another married executive, both lying to clients and co-workers about their whereabouts. That was a different matter entirely. James, as creative director, was facing a similar fate. The company had strict morality clauses in their executive contracts, not unusual for a prominent business in a conservative small town. "People are taking sides," Megan told me. "Most of the staff are disgusted with both of them, but especially with how they've been lying to everyone for so long." I thanked her for the information and suggested that perhaps it would be best if she didn't mention this call to anyone at the office. She agreed quickly. She didn't want to be seen as involved. In the scandal, Claire Parker called me every few days. She had kicked James out of their house and was considering her options. Her main concern was protecting their children from the town gossip, which was proving nearly impossible. "Tyler came home crying yesterday," she told me, referring to her 8-year-old son. "Some kids at school told him his daddy was a cheater and asked if we were getting divorced. How do I protect them from this, Michael?" I listened sympathetically and suggested that perhaps a temporary move to stay with family elsewhere might give them some breathing room. Claire had family in Connecticut. Maybe a few weeks there would allow the initial shock to die down. She thought it was a good idea and thanked me profusely for being such a support during this nightmare. I felt a twinge of guilt at manipulating her this way, but reminded myself that I hadn't created this situation. Rebecca and James had point too. Weeks after the confrontation at Pastor Williams' office, Rebecca called me, asking to meet and talk. We agreed to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop in the next town over. She looked terrible. She had lost at least 10 pounds, and the confident, vibrant woman I had married was now a shadow of herself, jumpily looking around as if expecting to be recognized and judged. "I've been suspended from work," she said after we had ordered our coffees, "pending an investigation into professional misconduct. They're going to fire me, Michael." "I know it." I nodded, feigning sympathy. "That's unfortunate. That's all you have to say?" she asked incredulously. "Michael, my career is falling apart. Our friends won't speak to me. I can't even shop in Cedar Creek anymore without people staring and whispering. What did you expect would happen, Rebecca? She looked down at her untouched coffee. Not this. I never thought it would blow up like this. You never thought you'd get caught. I corrected her. There's a difference. She wiped away a tear. I know I hurt you terribly, and I'm so sorry. But does everyone in town need to know our private business? Did you have to tell Pastor Williams, of all people? I leaned forward. I didn't tell. The entire town, Rebecca. I told exactly 4 people. My brother, my 2 closest friends, and Pastor Williams. Whatever happened after that was beyond my control. This wasn't entirely true. I had strategically selected people who would spread the word, but technically, I hadn't announced it publicly myself. James is being forced out too, she continued. Claire's taken the kids to her sister's place in Connecticut. His life is in shambles. That's usually what happens when you betray the people who love you most, I observed coldly. Rebecca looked at me with pleading eyes. I want to try to fix this, Michael. I've ended things with James completely. I'm seeing a therapist. I'll do couples counseling, anything you want. Please, just tell me there's a chance for us. I studied her face for a long moment. Was there any part of me that wanted to try again with this woman who had lied to me for years? Who had made a mockery of our vows and our life together? No, there wasn't. I've retained a divorce attorney, I said finally. You'll be receiving papers next week. Her face crumpled. Michael, please. It's over, Rebecca. You and James destroyed everything we had. Now you're both experiencing the consequences of your actions. I stood to leave, but she grabbed my wrist. Is this what you wanted all along? To ruin us socially before divorcing me? Is this your revenge? I gently removed her hand from my wrist. I wanted the truth to come out. That's all. As I walked away, I heard her sob behind me. A small part of me ached at the sound. 12 years of love doesn't vanish completely, even after the worst betrayal. But the larger part of me felt something different. The cold satisfaction of a plan well executed. Phase 5 was complete. Rebecca and James were facing the full social consequences of their affair, isolated and ostracized in the community they had deceived, and the final phase was about to begin. The divorce proceedings began with a strategic legal move that caught Rebecca completely off guard. While she was scrambling to find an attorney willing to take her case, several had conflicts of interest or were unwilling to represent the villain. In Cedar Creek's biggest scandal, my lawyer, Evelyn Marsh, filed for an emergency hearing regarding our marital assets. The basis for this emergency petition was evidence I had gathered showing that Rebecca had been using our joint funds to finance aspects of her affair: hotel rooms, gifts for James, weekend trips disguised as business travel. Under state law, this constituted dissipation of marital assets, a factor that could heavily influence the division of property in the divorce. Judge Harriet Coleman, a no-nonsense veteran of the family court system, granted the emergency hearing. Rebecca finally secured representation in the form of Dennis Lowell, a competent but overworked general practitioner who primarily handled real estate transactions and the occasional divorce that I in the courtroom. Evelyn Marsh was methodical and devastating. She presented bank statements, credit card records, hotel receipts, and even a spreadsheet I had created estimating the total amount Rebecca had spent on the affair over 3 years, just over $22,000. Your Honor, Evelyn argued, this represents a significant breach of fiduciary duty to the marital estate. Mrs. Harrington diverted these funds not for any legitimate purpose, but to facilitate an extramarital relationship that she concealed from my client. For years, Rebecca's attorney attempted to argue that the expenses were minimal in the context of our overall marital assets, and that I was merely seeking revenge through financial means. Judge Coleman was unimpressed. Mr. Lowell, whether the amount is $22,000 or $22 million, the principle remains the same. Your client used joint funds to conduct an affair behind her husband's back. That's not acceptable under the law. The judge granted a temporary injunction, freezing most of our joint assets and allowing me exclusive use of our marital home until the final divorce decree. Rebecca was permitted only limited withdrawals from our accounts for living expenses, which had to be documented and justified as we left the courtroom. Rebecca approached me in the hallway, her face a mask of disbelief and anger. Are you happy? Now, she hissed. I'm practically destitute while you're living in our home, sleeping in our bed. It's not our bed anymore, Rebecca, I replied calmly. And I didn't make this happen. You did. one deception at a time. The next blow came 2 days later when Rebecca was formally terminated from her position at Horizon Marketing. The company cited violations of their ethics policy and damage to their reputation in the community. The termination came without severance pay, another financial hit she couldn't afford. James Parker suffered the same fate, though he had already resigned and was planning to move to Albany, where he had secured a lower-paying position at a smaller agency.